Welcome to Author Life Podcast, where myself and guest authors share their stories, offer tips and advice, and share our writing, publishing, and marketing knowledge. I'm your host, Delcherie Gladden. Welcome back. I'm your host, Delcherie Gladden, and today we're going to be talking about writing the opposite sex. How to do that without just writing interchangeable characters that could be either or. One's just got long hair or wearing a dress or what have you. We're going to go over some tips and tricks for making realistic female and realistic male characters and using things that are inherent without resorting to stereotypes. So the first thing is that we want to pretty much ignore the old advice. And some of the old advice when it comes to writing the opposite sex is something along the lines of, in order to write a strong female character, simply write a male character and then change all the pronouns from male to female. That really doesn't work on several levels, and we're going to go over why that is, especially when dealing with trying to write a strong female character. Writing believable characters of the opposite sex takes knowledge and understanding of what group you're trying to write about. Another thing that we should ignore is Jack Nicholson. If any of you ever watched As Good as It Gets, he has a really funny line there that I always think of when I'm talking with other writers about writing the opposite sex. And in the movie, he says, when people ask him how he writes female characters, he says, "I think of a man and then I take away reason and accountability." So obviously that's not going to work either. That's terribly sexist. And so hopefully that's not your approach to writing female characters. I just had to throw that in there. When considering how to approach writing a character of the opposite sex, we need to think and remind ourselves that characters are people before they are a particular gender. And that's a good way to approach writing either male or female characters, that developing their character is the first, most basic step of developing a strong character, whether male or female. Now, what does a strong female character really mean? This has kind of been a hot topic in fiction, especially young adult fiction, where we kind of got into the whole Bella Swan syndrome of this weak, kind of whiny, kind of helpless character that readers got a little bit tired of, because there were a lot that were kind of copying that style, and we ended up with a lot of books with the female lead kind of having those more, I guess, kind of weepy qualities and not showing the strength and willingness to get out there and save herself kind of attitude. So in some cases, writers have tended to really go to the opposite spectrum. And basically that kind of creates this more physical strength, brusque personality, someone who's embraced their sexuality and is very independent. And sometimes this comes off as basically a man in a dress. And that's what we want to avoid when trying to write strong female characters. Kind of that interchangeable, this could be a guy or a girl based on the personality and characteristics. A true strong female character still has flaws and strengths. So there needs to be a balance. It's not just all toughness and moxie. There's going to be that tender side as well, and we want to be able to show that in equal parts. And consider also flaws as strengths in disguise don't really count. Flaws for the sake of plot versus flaws as part of the character arc is an important difference there. Flaws should be developed for a reason and should have a story behind them. When writing strong female characters, we also want to try to avoid extremes in most cases. Strong female characters do not equal acting like a man or shunning feminine things. A strong woman in any situation can still be a feminine woman as well. So don't think that those two have to be mutually exclusive in writing. They aren't in real life, so they don't need to be in writing either. However, the character can believe that personally, but as the writer, you don't want to write that as kind of the defining characteristic of that particular character. Because if you as the writer believe that, you'll end up writing stereotypes instead of strong females. Strong female characters on the opposite side also can't live their entire lives as damsels in distress. And kind of always makes me think of Daphne from the old Scooby-Doo series, not the new one, which isn't the greatest. In the old ones, Daphne's always the one getting kidnapped. She can never do anything for herself. Fred's always got to save her. And that works in a kid's serial TV show, but as a novel-length book, particularly in series where the female character can never do anything for themselves, that gets very tiresome for the reader. So let your female characters take the reins, make choices, handle some of the hard stuff, and take action. They shouldn't always be waiting to be rescued, hoping everything will turn out fine without ever acting and doing something on their own to move toward that resolution. Another key in writing strong female characters is to differentiate between behavior and personality traits. Going around punching people, that would be a behavior. Lacking confidence in relationships is a character trait. So make sure you're looking at those and putting those kind of in different areas of what they are as far as personality versus behavior. We need to have a balance of both in there. You don't want to let the actions your female character takes to reach her goal become her only identity. The personality should be just as strong as her choices and her actions leading toward resolution. You want to balance strengths with weakness that makes sense for the situation and the gender. There's kind of another fun quote that always gets brought up when we're talking about writing strong female characters particularly, and that's one from George R.R. Martin. He was in an interview, I can't remember which show he was being interviewed on, but the interviewer asks him basically how he writes such well-developed female characters, and he says, where does that come from? And George R.R. Martin's response is, I've always considered women to be people. So he writes them as people, as real, complex, developed people. And a lot of times, especially kind of in some older fiction, a lot of the female characters are kind of ephemeral, mysterious, these creatures that can't fully be understood. And you get kind of these just more blasé, whimsical, not well-developed, flat female characters. And that is not what we want when we're writing female characters. So we need to consider the thoughts, actions, and decisions of a female character, and that they should be understandable and relatable to your readers. Let your female characters experience life as a human being, not as a mystical creature. Readers want to understand their characters, not just get this kind of high-level glossing over of what that character is about. Female characters should not be measured by their sexuality, their clothing, or their fighting abilities. That's very one-dimensional. And if that is the only aspect of your character that you're really taking time to develop and get into, you're not going to end up with a very well-rounded character. Violence and sex alone do not make a character strong. Pinpoint your character's true strength and then start building from there with your development. And just like with any character that you're really trying to develop into a complex character with a lot of depth, you want to consider, what is that character's reason to be? So with your female character, why does she exist in this story? Try to explain that in one sentence only. If being the love interest is the biggest definer, it's time to dig a little bit deeper, because that's not going to be enough to create a really complex character. That's very one-dimensional. You want to make your female character more than just a plot device to further somebody else's story. Your female character's decisions and actions must have meaning as well, ones that don't rely on because she's a woman to back them up. That's not going to be very relatable or believable to your readers, because so much more goes into decision making than just what gender you are. Forcing feminine moments to remind readers of gender are usually fairly pointless and lack substance. So try to avoid those little scenes or conversations that are simply in there just to remind your readers that this is a female character, because maybe you feel like that hasn't been developed enough. And an example of that is from the movie Alien, where there's a scene, there are several scenes where, she's at one point in the middle of some kind of fight scene or battle, and she runs off to go save the cat. And there wasn't a lot of point behind that scene. Critics of the film kind of pointed that out as something like, just trying to show her tender side for a moment there. And it really just kind of took the viewer out of the scene altogether. Another one from that same film is the final scene where she's getting back into the sleeping pod thing that she's in, and she undresses down to a camisole and panties first. And there wasn't really any reason for that either, except to show some skin, I guess, to remind the viewers again, this is an attractive woman that you're watching a movie about. It didn't have any relevance, and it wasn't particularly necessary in any way that had been explained in the movie before, that she needed to undress to that level in order to get into the pod. So if you find those scenes kind of when you're going back and editing and you're asking yourself, was this relevant? Did I give the reader any insight into my character or any personal information? If you're not finding good reasons for that, go ahead and just take that out and look for other opportunities where you can build on that character and make them more complete. Now, with strong female characters, sometimes we get stuck on the idea of strong. They have to be strong all the time. If they show any weakness in any way, then that's going to diminish from their strength. And that is not true when writing male or female characters, but particularly with female characters, this tends to happen a little bit more often. Asking help does not detract from their other strengths. No one is capable of doing everything, and it's okay for strong female characters to admit that and to ask for help. It does show some vulnerability, but it does not detract from their other strong qualities. Fear, pain, grief, love, and happiness are all a part of the human experience. A strong female character faces a variety of internal and external conflicts that have the potential to break them. And that's okay. That's what readers want to see. They want to see that dual side of them, the strength and the weakness, and see that contrast. An invulnerable character tends to be pretty boring overall. When your character has some vulnerabilities, that's when your readers can relate. That's when they're going to engage more and become more connected with the character. Now, let's switch to writing male characters. For some female writers, this can be a little bit more challenging. For some, it comes more naturally. It kind of depends on the writer. But I did want to go over some tricks and tips to kind of help those who maybe find writing male characters a little bit more difficult than writing female characters. So to write convincing male characters, we really want to draw from reality. Men tend to say what they mean. They don't resort to fishing very often. They like fixing problems. They tend to be a little bit more concise with their words than women do at times. Men tend to talk about topics, such as sports, cars, fishing, what have you, more than people. They don't have a lot of conversations, typically about people, especially who are not present. And not that that's necessarily always gossiping, but just having detailed conversations about other people. They're more likely to have conversations about certain topics instead. Men tend to have a bigger picture mindset, looking at things in the overall rather than the minute. They tend to be more assertive, more task-oriented, and more introspective. Now, with that list, I do want to point out that, of course, your male characters don't have to have all these qualities. You can definitely have variations here and there. These are just kind of general ideas and kind of an overall view of tendencies with men. And these lists come from psychologists and people who study behaviors. These are things that have been noticed with men as generalizations. Now, let's talk about how men and women differ a little bit more. There are 3 major differences when this has been studied by psychologists. And the first one is that ego is a motivator. And that can be for good or for bad. That can end up creating a masterpiece because they're motivated to excel, to be better than someone else, etc. Or it can, lead to broken bones and some bad decisions and disaster when ego maybe gets a little bit too carried away. So use that to push your character one direction or the other at times. Men also tend to be more visual creatures than women. They react to visual stimuli more readily, and visual stimuli tend to leave more of an impression with men than they do with women a lot of the time. Men are also generally less, I'll just put it as touchy-feely. Again, this is kind of a generalization. Everybody's a little bit different and all your characters are a little bit different. But with men, emotions tend to be more of a private thing rather than a public thing to discuss and share. So they are less willing to share and get into deep discussions about feelings. And yes, of course, there are outliers. There is variation between characters and such. These are just kind of an overall idea to help steer you toward developing a strong male character. Let's talk about male character cliches that are often best to avoid. The first one is the ladies' man. And this is a character who is unrealistic and leaves little room for personality. If their only motivation is sex, that doesn't lend to developing a lot of well-rounded personality traits or a lot of depth in that character. So, unless you're using that cliche for a reason and you're going to develop from that point, it's best to start with a little bit more than just that. But again, if you do use that and start with it, there must be consequences to that type of outlook and that type of personality in order for it to be believable. The other biggest cliche is the Mr. Perfect, kind of that Prince Charming, everybody's dream guy type of man. No one is ever the master of all things or unstoppable in all his conquests. You kind of get this in a lot of more heavily romantic-based novels. The millionaire, he's got all the money, could have any woman, successful at everything, just unstoppable in anything that they do. And this leads to little chance for progression because they've already mastered everything, they've already conquered everything. And you're left with not a lot of character development there if that is the character that you're starting with zero flaws and zero reason to change. This makes the character very unrelatable because everyone else, has to struggle to find success or meaning or good relationships. When everything comes too easy to a character, that can be very frustrating for the reader because they're not going to be able to connect very well. Now, let's go into male characters and emotion a little bit more. And again, these are things that come from psychologists and behavioral studies that I'm taking these from. Men are biologically predisposed to cry less, which was really interesting when I was reading an article about this. It's not just about them being macho, although societally speaking, in a lot of Western culture, that is also a factor. But there is actually a biological component to that as well, which I said was really fascinating. Men also do react to emotional conflict, but they process it internally before broaching it with someone else. So basically, they want to solve the conflict, not discuss it at length. A lot of men tend to be problem solvers, and when they're presented with a problem, they want to fix it. And this isn't just a stereotype. It's how a lot of men work and is realistic. So based on these kind of behavioral studies that have been done over quite a while. So don't feel like you have to steer away from anything that you see as like a generalization or possibly a stereotype. Sometimes those are accurate traits. We just don't want that to be their only trait. Now, one more aspect of writing male characters that I wanted to talk about is basically how to avoid making your guys be really creepy. This is something that tends to happen more when women are writing male characters, just because of the different way we often tend to view the world. Like I mentioned earlier, that men are more apt to react to visual stimuli. They don't dwell on visual details. Excessive description comes off as creepy, especially to male readers, and particularly when we're talking about other people, describing another person or describing a setting in detail. And to kind of give you this point a little bit more, imagine two men meeting for the first time in a scene, and your male character immediately starts describing to the reader the other man's clothing, hairstyle, eye color, jawline, etc. This suggests intimacy between the two people, that this male character is taking that much effort and that much time to catalog and define this other character's look and characteristics. Often this will come off as a possible sexual interest. So if that's not what you're going for, then it's best to change tactics. When you're writing from the male point of view, you'll often want to limit details to plot relevant details that the reader needs to know and go a little bit lighter on some of the physical descriptions. Find other ways to work that in rather than just straight internal thought or internal dialogue about those kind of things. Dialogue is going to be an important part of writing a realistic male character, because men and women do tend to speak differently and have different patterns and different aspects of their speech that will make them more unique. You want to make your male characters sound like male characters. We don't want the dialogue to be interchangeable of gender. Men tend to be more short and sweet when they're talking. They tend to use a little bit more bravado when they're talking. They utilize nonverbal communication quite a bit more. They limit gossip and social status discussions. They use less apologetic language. You're not going to find a lot of kind of gushing types of speech with men. And don't be afraid to let your male characters talk about guy things. It's not cliche that your male character likes sports, for example, or cars or whatever. Let guys talk about guy things. That's okay. That's not a cliche that you have to avoid in writing. That's just working with what a lot of men do typically like to discuss, and especially, as I mentioned before, being more topic-oriented when having conversations with people. Let those topics come naturally. Now, let's talk about the difference between reality, generalizations, and stereotypes. With stereotypes, an example of that would be all men are obsessed with sports. You know, you will find those men who are like that, but not all men are into sports. So that would be a stereotype. That's taking one area and applying it to every person in the group. A generalization would be more along the lines of the majority of men like sports. You're acknowledging that this is not going to be true for all men, but there are a high number of men who do like sports. So you can make a generalized statement there. The reality is more along the lines of, yes, a lot of men really enjoy sports, but some of them don't. And that's just how it is. Everybody has their own interests. While we want to avoid out and out stereotypes with no substance, if something is generally true about most men or women, don't feel like you can't use it. Part of writing realistic characters is meeting the reader's expectations. And sometimes those general qualities are what readers are looking for and helps them to connect and relate to a character a little bit better. Male and female characters need to be distinctively different, from dialogue to actions to how they approach relationships. They don't have to be complete opposites, and they don't have to defy all norms and conventions in order to be considered strong and interesting characters. The major hurdle of writing the opposite sex is the same one with writing the same sex. It's basically writing deep and fascinating characters your readers can connect with. And when you focus more on creating that depth and complexity, you'll have an easier time writing strong characters of either sex. When you first approach a character, focus more on creating a rich life and meaningful conflict first, then further define their journey by bringing their gender into play alongside all the other important aspects of who they are. And when all else fails, ask a member of the opposite sex to read your character. They're usually pretty good authority on the subject, and they can point out those areas that maybe aren't quite working or aren't hitting quite on the head of what you're trying to get to with that character. Beta readers are always a fabulous resource, so don't be afraid to reach out to someone else to read and give you an opinion on either a male or female character, and have them let you know kind of what strikes you as odd or isn't quite working. So again, just kind of the parting thought there. Writing the opposite sex can be a challenge for both men and women. And when approaching that, think first about writing a complex character with depth and good characteristic traits and a good backstory, and bring their gender, bring those gender-specific experiences and emotions into play alongside all the other aspects of writing a good character. Don't make it the sole focus, or you're making your challenge even that much more difficult. Writing the opposite sex can be a really great exercise if you've never done it, just to expand your writing skills and see where maybe your strengths and weaknesses are in that area as well. So hopefully these tips have been helpful today, helping you kind of get a little bit more of an idea on how to fill out and round out your characters and make them a little bit more complex and complete. So thank you for listening today. We'll be back soon with another episode. As always, please feel free to leave comments on the blog or the website and suggest topics you'd like to have covered. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again for listening to Author Life Podcast. For more information on the podcast or guest authors, check out the links in the show description. If there's a topic you'd like to learn more about, find me online and send me suggestions anytime.